All right, everyone. So I didn't want to have to record another lecture on this topic, but there was a pretty big event October 7th, 2023. And, obviously, if I'm teaching the history of the Middle East class, I already know this is going to have tremendous effects currently, as I'm recording this a few weeks after the event and years down the line. So obviously, depending on when you're watching this, there's going to be other impacts that I'm not even talking about yet because they haven't happened yet. So I'm assuming most people are familiar with this. This was, of course, a massively global story, one of the most horrific moments in the entire history of the Jewish people in modern times. In fact, on October 7th, it was not since the Holocaust that so many Jews were murdered in one day. So what had happened, of course, you could see on this map, the area in red is the area of the Gaza Strip. That is the area that fell under the control of Hamas. The areas kind of you see more in the blue there on this map. Again, those are the Palestinian areas that were more controlled under another group called Fatah. And as I explained in my previous lectures, there were these earlier wars and who took control of those areas, and eventually was Fatah controlling the areas of the what we call was sometimes referred to as the West Bank, and the area of Gaza in red was taken over by Hamas. And so on October 7th, Hamas, it was just the end of a Jewish holiday actually, entered into Israel, and the terrorist group massacred 1,400 people. I'm not going to go into all the images and show you pictures of what happened. They are beyond brutal. But I will give you some descriptions because, again, some of you may be watching this down the line and we go, wow, I didn't know that happened. Because they didn't just murder 1,400 civilians. They targeted civilians on purpose. There was one rock concert, or just a concert actually, just like a local little concert rave type thing, and they went into there and there were people just literally singing and dancing, and they just butchered hundreds of people there. They went into people's homes, they slaughtered children in their sleep, they killed children in front of their own parents, and they recorded these things on the people who they killed, their phones, and then they sent it to their friends and families. That's what they were doing. They went as far, Hamas, as literally capturing and beheading babies. And so, I'm trying to present all of this, as a historical event, but at the same time, obviously, there's a human element of it that's just beyond the capacity of kind of human nature to endure this kind of just human evil. I don't know how else to call it. There were 1,400 people murdered at the time I'm recording this. There were 30 Americans as well. And at the time I'm recording this, there was also over a couple hundred hostages, including American hostages, involved as well in this. So Hamas captured some hostages and took them in, a couple hundred, including children. So obviously, an event of this proportion, and again, if anybody wants, you can go on your own and find the images and videos. It's just too much to include, I think, here. And so, of course, Israel's going to react. Now, when this happened, one of the things I want to focus on is what is the world reaction to it? And this was kind of interesting. Most nations around the world really did unite around Israel in terms of, you see the landmarks lit up. I mean, I remember this very vividly, living through it, of course. The Eiffel Tower, the Brandenburg Gate in Germany, which of course is really symbolic, if you think of what happened in Germany, the White House, 10 Downing Street, the Empire State Building, and most political figures in the United States. This is during the time when President Biden was in office, very much supported Israel when this happened. Biden delivered a very fiery speech, condemning Hamas and all the evil that they did. And pretty much everyone who was a Republican, a Democrat, it didn't really matter, supported Israel. There was a group of about 10 people who would have to be basically described as the most far left of the Democrat Party that kind of spoke up against Israel, but most people in the United States did support Israel when this happened because it was clearly such a act of just barbarity. I mean, they literally targeted civilians. However, what we also saw is a tremendous rise of anti-Semitism in some circles as well after the event. So what's going to happen? Before I talk about all the anti-Semitism and where it comes from, I think another important point to mention is Iran. because so much of the events that transpired were orchestrated by the country of Iran. And I think I'd mentioned in my previous lectures about, the Iran nuclear deal during the time of President Obama, and how many people now are very concerned about what could happen next, kind of the domino effects of this. Because, it's very possible, depending on when you're watching this could all spiral into a massive global war. Because right now, after this event, Israel, of course, is moving into Gaza. Israel's moving into Gaza in an attempt to find Hamas, first for the air. They're going to do a ground invasion. And if Iran begins to get involved in this, remember, there were 30 Americans killed. There's no doubt in my mind the United States is going to put in massive military force in as well. And then what does Russia do? What does China do? What does everybody else do? And then you got a full-out global war. So I think that's something important to keep in mind. Again, at the time of recording this, I don't know. But what else we also saw is, even though there were a lot of nations and political figures and a lot of celebrities that came out, and various people supporting the Jewish people in Israel after this most horrific attack since the Holocaust, we do see anti-Semitism dramatically on the rise. In fact, in the weeks following it, it was reported there was a 400% rise of anti-Semitic attacks against the Jewish people in the United States. And much of it came from college campuses. It was so bad that actually many wealthy donors to college campuses basically said, we're not donating to colleges like Harvard and Penn State, because they were allowing really horrific things. There was accounts of faculty celebrating what Hamas did. There were multiple massive marches on college campuses, cheering and calling for the end of the Jewish people from the river to the sea, referring to the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. There was one story in New York College where the Jews were literally forced to lock themselves in the library. And so there were a countless number of accounts on college campuses where this happened. In many ways, it's sad to say this, but at least again, when I'm recording this, college campuses probably had the greatest number of anti-Semitic attacks, more than anywhere else. You also saw some pretty disturbing things in Europe. There's, for example, in London, Jewish businesses that were attacked and vandalized, and some people referring it to as another Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass. In Germany, there were Jewish homes that were tagged with Stars of David to be identified. And so this is a great concern because, being the historian in me, I know how quickly things can slide and how things can get bad very fast. And so, there's also the concern of what comes out of the news. There was one particular story on October 18th, a very famous news article, New York Times, and they said as the Israelis are moving into Gaza, they were Israelis targeting Hamas places. Rocket hit a hospital. And there was a big New York Times headline, Israeli rocket hits Hamas hospital. Well, within a few hours, they found the audio recordings of the Hamas people talking with each other saying it was a Hamas rocket that misfired and, hit their own hospital, killing 500 people. But there's still people to this day, if you go on social media and things like that, that will say, oh, Israel purposely blew up a hospital, these kind of blood libels. Now, this is not to say that as Israel moves into Gaza, there are not going to be civilian casualties. Of course there will be, right? Just as there were in World War II, just as there were in any other times when there's a war. Israel does try to avoid these civilian casualties. One of the things they did is they tell people in Gaza, get out of the way, we're coming in. And they even allowed humanitarian aid in there. And at times, Hamas wouldn't even let them out. Hamas told the people in Gaza, no, you can't leave. One of the things of Hamas's MO is to use, whether it's hospitals or schools or mosques as a place under there would need to be their tunnels underneath and where they fire their rockets from. And they use their people as human shields. And so, theoretically, people go, well, Israel's a stronger army. Well, yeah, Israel's a stronger army. And if Israel wanted to, they could theoretically just go from the air and just demolish all of Gaza. But instead, they're going to go in by ground, very likely, door to door, just specifically to find the Hamas people. And, just to give you a sense of numbers, if this happened in the United States, per capita, it would be the equivalent of 40,000 Americans massacred in that way. Imagine thousands of American babies beheaded. I have a feeling if that happened in the United States, no one would be telling the United States to show restraint. But historically, there's always been kind of this double standard with Israel. You know, it's Golda Meir who said, you know, when the Jewish people are being attacked and killed, they're mourned. When they defend themselves, they're criticized. So I'd rather be alive and criticized than dead and mourned. So I fully expect Israel to go in, and I also fully expect there to be many news stories and college campus events attacking Israel for going in there. You know, blood libel stories that Israel is targeting civilians and they're committing quote unquote genocide. You'll hear these stories all the time, you know, and of course these are things are crazy. I mean, I've even already heard the stories we saw after like 9/11 that this was an inside job and it was planned, and you know all these kind of crazy stories. I'm sure you're going to find that have had no evidence of all for, of course. So then there's, of course, again, the potential long-term impacts of all this that are still unknown. Will other countries get involved? Will you know, Hamas be ended or not? Will this bring about any more stability? And my gut feeling is probably what's going to happen is Israel is going to move in, and now Israel will probably take over a bit more of that Gaza area. Again, one of the ironies of all of the story is from, if you go back to the beginning, the area that was proposed for the Arab people keeps getting smaller because every time they attack Israel, and if you keep attacking a nation, they're of course going to fight back. Now, Israel did give back a lot of the land, as we talked about. Remember, they gave back a lot of territory through peace treaties simply for having Israel's right to exist accepted. And that's really, I think, as I said in the last lecture, what so much of this comes down to, that if everyone simply accepted Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, all of this horrific bloodshed and the civilians that are going to be killed, whether it's in Israel or in Gaza or whatever, would not happen. But as long as there are people like Hamas, whose singular goal is to wipe out all the Jews, and of course they don't just hate Jews, they hate pretty much anybody from so many other groups as well, you know, these horrific things are not going to end, you know, and that is at the core of it. Sometimes I see, you know, slogans that people say free Palestine. Well, if you want to free Palestine, you got to free them from Hamas and the people who want to eliminate the entire Jewish nation. There will never be peace in the area, and I've said this before, until that happens. So anyways, again, that's a bit of an update of what's going on. It's a shame that there's just so many dark moments. And again, you know, I always tell people you have to make up your own mind on things, but you need to know the full facts. So if you hear stories of, well, people are being killed in Gaza, yeah, people are going to be killed in Gaza. But why, right? What was the events? What's going on? What's Hamas doing to prevent the deaths of civilians in Gaza? Or are they encouraging it? All right. What's Egypt doing? Is Egypt going to take in refugees or not? Things of that nature. So, you know, there's a lot to this. All right, everybody. I hope all that's clear. If you have any questions, let me know.